I walked outside at 6 in the morning with my coffee to check on the restoration work, and the driveway was empty. 32 feet of 1952 Seagrave pumper, painted fire engine red, worth more than most people's houses, just gone. Then I saw the note zip-tied to my mailbox. Vehicle towed for commercial equipment violation, it said. Retrieve within 72 hours or face disposal. I stood there in my bathrobe, steam rising off my coffee cup in the cold North Carolina dawn, and I actually laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind of laugh you do right before you ruin someone's entire week. My name's Marcus Reed. I'm 48 years old, and I've been the fire chief for Wake County for the past 7 years. Before that, I spent 18 years working my way up from rookie firefighter to battalion chief. I know every fire code, every emergency vehicle statute, every county ordinance that touches public safety. And that 1952 Seagrave they just towed? That wasn't some hobby project or a midlife crisis restoration. That was a piece of living history I'd been restoring for our department's 75th anniversary, and these people just stole it without bothering to ask what the hell it was. Let me back up because none of this makes sense without understanding what that truck meant. I bought it 3 years ago at a municipal auction in Raleigh for $62,000. The county commissioners approved the purchase as part of our Heritage Preservation Initiative, understanding that down here in North Carolina, we take history seriously. Almost as seriously as we take barbecue, and that's saying something. That Seagrave had been our Engine 7 from 1952 until 1983. 31 years of service protecting this community. It responded to the textile mill fire of 1967 that killed 4 men and injured 11 others. My own father was on that crew, just 22 years old, pulling hose through smoke so thick, he said it was like swimming through ink. The truck pulled children out of Roosevelt Elementary when the roof collapsed in '73 during that spring storm that came through like God's own hammer and took out half the roof in 15 minutes. It pumped water for 16 straight hours during the Warehouse District fire of '79 that threatened to take out 6 blocks of downtown. Every dent in that chrome, every scratch in that paint, every bit of wear on those running boards told a story about sacrifice and service. When the department finally retired it in '83, it went to a private collector in Virginia who kept it in a climate-controlled garage for decades like it was a damn museum piece. When he passed away, his estate auctioned everything, and I saw the listing and knew immediately we had to bring it home. The restoration took 3 years and cost another $118,000 in parts and specialist work. Every penny documented, every receipt filed with the county finance office because that's how you handle public funds when you're not an idiot. We stripped it down to bare metal, rebuilt the flathead inline-6 engine, restored the original brass fittings that were tarnished black, replaced rotted wood in the ladder housing, rewired the entire electrical system to modern safety standards while keeping that period-correct appearance that made it beautiful. The paint alone cost $14,000 because we matched the original formula from 1952, a specific shade the Seagrave Company only used for 8 years before they switched suppliers. I did most of the mechanical work myself in my detached garage on weekends, usually starting around 7 in the morning and working until Sarah called me in for dinner, which was usually around the time I'd lost track of whether it was still Saturday or already Sunday. My wife had been patient through the whole process, understanding this wasn't just about a truck. It was about honoring the men who'd served, including my father who passed away 6 years ago from lung cancer caused by decades of smoke inhalation that finally caught up with him. The truck was 97% complete when they towed it. We were 3 weeks away from the 75th anniversary celebration where we'd planned to drive it in a parade through downtown Raleigh, let kids sit in the driver's seat and ring that beautiful brass bell, let the old-timers who'd served on it run their hands over the wheel one more time, and remember when they were young and invincible. I bought my house in the Riverside Meadows subdivision 6 years ago, right after I made Chief and Sarah, and I decided we wanted more space than our place in town could offer. 2 acres at the eastern edge of the development, a brick ranch that needed work but had good bones, and a detached 2-car garage that was perfect for the restoration project I'd been dreaming about since my father first told me stories about Engine 7 when I was a kid. The lot predates the subdivision by 15 years. Back in the 90s, this was all farmland owned by a man named Robert Hutchins who sold off parcels as he got older and his kids moved away and didn't want to farm anymore. The developers bought most of it in 2004, built their fancy entrance with stone pillars and a fountain that's lit up at night like a damn casino, laid out streets with names like Harmony Lane and Serenity Court that sound like they came from a subdivision name generator. But my lot and 3 others on the perimeter were already sold and built on before the HOA even existed. When I bought the place, I made damn sure with my real estate attorney that there were no covenants, no restrictions, no homeowner association authority over my property whatsoever. Grandfathered in, completely independent, mine to do with as I pleased within county zoning. I had it in writing from 3 different sources before I signed anything, because I'd heard enough horror stories about HOAs and their power trips to know better. For the first 5 years, everything was fine. I kept to myself mostly, worked long shifts at the station running calls and dealing with department politics, came home and worked on the Seagrave in the garage with the doors closed, maintained my yard to reasonable standards so nobody could complain I was letting the place go to hell. My neighbors were polite when we crossed paths at the mailbox. Several were retirees who'd moved down from Pennsylvania and New Jersey looking for milder winters and lower property taxes and fewer Yankees, ironically enough. A few worked in Raleigh or Durham and commuted daily, probably listening to sports radio and complaining about traffic like everyone else. Most of them had no idea what I did for a living, and I liked it that way. When you're a fire chief, people either treat you like some kind of hero or they start asking you to come inspect their smoke detectors at neighborhood barbecues, and neither one of those is particularly comfortable. I didn't advertise it, didn't put a decal on my truck, didn't fly a flag, didn't wear department shirts around the neighborhood. But about 8 months ago, things started changing when the HOA elected new board members, including a woman named Donna Kelshire, who became president. Donna was late 50s, perfectly put together every single time I saw her like she was about to do a photo shoot for Retirement Community magazine, drove a pearl white Range Rover that probably cost more than my annual salary, and had very specific ideas about what the neighborhood should look like. She sent out monthly newsletters on cream-colored cardstock with a little leaf design in the corner, talking about community harmony and maintaining property values, and protecting our collective investment like we were running a hedge fund instead of just living in houses. The first letter came in February on a Tuesday, and I remember it because it was the same day we had that kitchen fire on Morrison Street. Mr. Reed, it began in that formal way that immediately tells you someone's about to tell you what to do with your own property. We've received concerns from several residents regarding the large commercial vehicle occasionally visible from the street. While we understand you may use this vehicle for work purposes, the Riverside Meadows Architectural Review Committee requests that you consider storing it in a less prominent location to maintain our community's residential character. It was signed in blue ink with her full name and title like she was signing legislation. I read it twice, genuinely confused about what commercial vehicle she meant, and then I realized she was talking about the Seagrave. I'd pulled it out of the garage 3 days earlier to run the engine and check the brake system, standard maintenance to keep seals from drying out and pistons from seizing up. It sat in my driveway for maybe 6 hours, gleaming in the sun, beautiful as the day it rolled off the line in 1952. I meant to call her and explain what it actually was, but we had that structure fire, and I spent 8 hours on scene, and by the time I got home at midnight smelling like smoke and exhausted down to my bones, I'd completely forgotten about the letter. It sat on my kitchen counter for a week before I tossed it in the recycling, figuring if I just kept the truck in the garage except for maintenance, she'd move on to bothering someone else about their mailbox color or their lawn height or whatever else HOA presidents obsess about when they've got too much time and too much authority. The second letter came in April, same cream envelope, but the tone had shifted from request to demand. Mr. Reed, despite our previous communication, we have continued to observe the commercial vehicle on your property in violation of community standards. Please remove the vehicle or provide documentation of proper commercial storage arrangements within 30 days. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading that one, feeling my jaw tighten and my coffee going cold while I tried to process the phrase violation of community standards. Like a fire truck that had saved lives was somehow morally equivalent to parking a rusted camper on blocks in the front yard with chickens living in it. But again, we got hammered that week with calls. A hazmat incident at the high school when some genius chemistry student mixed things that should never be mixed. A wildfire in the county nature preserve that took 3 days to contain because the wind kept shifting and the underbrush was dry as paper. An industrial accident at the lumber mill where we had to stabilize a worker with a crushed arm for 40 minutes while waiting for the medevac helicopter because the weather was too rough for them to fly direct. By the time things calmed down and I could breathe again, the 30-day deadline had passed, and I still hadn't responded. That was my mistake. I should have made time. Should have picked up the phone and explained. But I figured if I just kept the truck in the garage except for absolutely necessary maintenance, she'd eventually give up and move on to her next crusade. The third letter arrived 2 weeks ago, and this one dropped every pretense of politeness. Final notice, it said in bold letters at the top, like a utility bill threatening disconnection. Continued violation of community standards regarding commercial vehicle storage. The Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association has authorized removal of the vehicle at owner's expense if not relocated within 14 days. Failure to comply will result in towing and impound with all associated costs billed to the property owner. Govern yourself accordingly. That last phrase, govern yourself accordingly, that's when I knew Donna had stopped seeing me as a neighbor and started seeing me as an obstacle to be eliminated. But we had 2 more structure fires that week, and I was coordinating with the state fire marshal's office on new hazmat training requirements because regulations had changed, and March Madness was starting, which meant everyone in North Carolina was distracted by whether Duke or Carolina would make it further in the tournament, and I kept thinking I'd handle it this weekend, next weekend, as soon as things slowed down just a little. Things never slowed down in this job. You don't choose when emergencies happen. You don't schedule disasters around your personal calendar. And now, standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning staring at empty concrete, where 32 feet of history should be parked, I was paying the price for letting it slide. I went back inside, set down my coffee, which had gone completely cold by now, and called the number on the towing notice. A man answered on the 4th ring, voice rough like he'd been smoking unfiltered Camels since he was 14 and saw no reason to stop. Yeah, Patriot Towing. This is Marcus Reed, I said, trying to keep my voice level even though I could feel my hands starting to shake. You towed a vehicle from my property early this morning. Big red fire truck. 32 feet long. He grunted like I'd just told him the most boring thing he'd heard all week. Yeah, we got it. That'll be $4,800 to release. I blinked and looked at the notice again, certain I'd misheard. $4,800? Storage fees, after-hours retrieval surcharge, oversized vehicle rate. He rattled off like he was reading from a menu. You got 72 hours before we start disposal proceedings. Per the contract. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest, and I realized my free hand had curled into a fist without me noticing. That vehicle is a registered emergency apparatus owned by Wake County Fire Department, I said slowly, enunciating every single word. There was a pause on the line, and I could hear papers rustling. Then he said, not according to the work order we received. Says here it's an abandoned commercial vehicle blocking residential access. I actually laughed again, that same not happy laugh. It's a 1952 Seagrave fire truck undergoing historic restoration for the county's 75th anniversary celebration, I said. It's registered to Wake County Fire Department. It's got county plates. There are decals on the doors. It's painted fire engine red with gold lettering that says County Fire Department in letters a foot tall. What part of that looks abandoned or commercial? The work order says remove and impound. He repeated like he was reading scripture. You want it back, you pay the fees. Cash or certified check. No personal checks, no credit cards, no payment plans. Then he hung up on me. Just like that. Click. Dial tone. I stood there in my kitchen listening to that empty sound, my coffee completely forgotten, and I realized this had just become something much bigger than a neighborhood dispute. This was theft of government property. This was someone who'd made a catastrophic mistake and didn't even know it yet. I made 3 calls in quick succession. First to my deputy chief, Tom Morrison, letting him know I'd be late coming in because I had a situation that needed immediate attention and couldn't wait. Tom had been with the department 22 years, worked his way up from firefighter to captain to deputy chief, and he knew me well enough to hear that edge in my voice and not ask questions he didn't need answers to yet. Handle what you need to handle, he said. I've got things covered here. Second call was to Carla Moss, the real estate attorney who'd helped me with the property purchase 6 years ago and who didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone, which is exactly why I liked working with her. Carla, I said when she answered, I need you to pull every document related to my property purchase and meet me at your office in an hour. Also pull your files on HOA authority limitations and emergency vehicle exemptions under state law." There was a brief pause. Then she said, "What happened, Marcus?" "Somebody just made a very expensive mistake," I said. "And I need to make sure we document every single step of what happens next, so there's no ambiguity whatsoever." The third call was to Bill Howell, the county administrator I'd worked with for over a decade on budget requests and emergency management planning and all the bureaucratic machinery that keeps a fire department running. "Bill," I said, "I need to know something, and I need to know it right now. If an HOA authorizes the towing of a registered emergency vehicle without verifying ownership or legal status, what kind of liability are we looking at?" There was a long silence on the line, the kind of silence that means someone's brain is running through implications at high speed. Then he said quietly, "Catastrophic. Both civil and potentially criminal." "Why? What happened?" "Because somebody just towed engine 7 out of my driveway at 5 this morning and is demanding $4,800 ransom to release it, and I'm about to make this the most educational experience of their entire lives." By 9 that morning, I was sitting in Carla's office downtown with documents spread across her conference table like evidence at a crime scene. Title and registration showing Wake County Fire Department as legal owner with my name listed as primary operator and restoration coordinator. My property deed with clear notation that the lot was exempt from HOA covenants and restrictions, grandfathered in under the original plat map from 1998. Receipts for every single dollar spent on restoration, organized chronologically in a 3-ring binder that Sarah had helped me put together because she's better at that kind of thing than I am. $62,000 for the auction purchase. $14,000 for paint and primer and clear coat. $8,000 for chrome restoration that required specialists because you can't half-ass chrome work. $12,000 for the engine rebuild. $6,000 for upholstery because the original seats were rotted through. $4,000 for brass fittings. $3,000 for the electrical system. $9,000 for miscellaneous parts and supplies and tools I didn't have. Every receipt had a date, a vendor name, and a description. Photos of the truck in various stages of restoration, taken in my garage with the address clearly visible. Photos of the completed truck in my driveway with my mailbox right there in frame showing my house number. The 3 letters from Donna showing the escalation from polite request to demand to threat. The towing notice with Patriot Towing's information and that $4,800 ransom demand. Carla read through everything slowly and methodically, making notes on a yellow legal pad in her precise handwriting that looked like it came from another era. When she finished, she took off her reading glasses and looked at me with that expression lawyers get when opposing counsel has screwed up so badly they can't quite believe it. "Marcus," she said, "this isn't just HOA overreach. This is theft of government property. And the towing company holding it for ransom adds extortion to the list." She smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. The smile of someone who's about to absolutely ruin another person's week. "Do you want this handled quietly or publicly?" I thought about those 3 letters. I thought about Donna's signature in confident blue ink getting more aggressive each time. I thought about that rough voice on the phone telling me I had 72 hours before disposal like my father's truck was garbage. I thought about every HOA president and board member in every subdivision everywhere who think their bylaws and their authority trump common sense and basic human decency. Publicly, I said, I want everyone within 50 miles to understand what happens when you don't ask questions before you act, when you don't verify facts before you use power, when you care more about aesthetics than history or the law or basic respect for your neighbors. Carla nodded slowly. "Then we do this by the book," she said. "Every step documented, every interaction recorded, every legal requirement met to the letter. We're going to make this a case study in how not to run an HOA." She picked up her phone and called the county attorney's office, spoke with someone for a few minutes in that shorthand way lawyers communicate, and got us an appointment for that afternoon. Then I called Tom Braddock, the state fire marshal. Tom and I came up through the ranks together, worked side by side for 15 years pulling people out of bad situations before he took the state position 8 years ago. He was methodical, detail-oriented, and took regulatory violations personally because he understood that every regulation was written in someone's blood. "Tom," I said when he answered, "hypothetically speaking, If a private towing company impounded an emergency vehicle without proper authorization and then refused to release it without payment, what would your office do? He didn't even pause to think about it. Revoke their license and press charges, he said flatly. Emergency vehicles are specifically protected under North Carolina General Statute 20-169 for exactly this reason. You don't touch them without verification and authorization from the owning agency. Period. Why are you asking me this hypothetically, Marcus? Because it's not hypothetical anymore, I said. And then I spent 20 minutes walking him through everything that had happened, from the first letter in February to waking up this morning to an empty driveway. I could hear him taking notes, the scratch of pen on paper, the occasional grunt of acknowledgement or disbelief. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll be there by noon. Give me that tow yard's address. We're going to pay them a visit, and I'm bringing enforcement authority with me. Don't do anything until I arrive. I want this done right, by the book, so there's no question about procedure." By 11 that morning, Bill Howell had met with the county attorney Jennifer Marks, and they prepared a preliminary demand letter that was essentially a legal hand grenade with the pin pulled. It outlined potential charges including theft of government property, interference with county emergency operations, improper impound procedures under state law, and unlawful detention of public assets. The letter noted that North Carolina General Statute 20-169 specifically exempts emergency vehicles from private property restrictions and HOA authority, and that the vehicle's registration clearly identified it as county property. Any reasonable verification process, meaning literally looking at the registration or calling the county, would have revealed this information within 5 minutes. The failure to verify constituted gross negligence at minimum, potentially criminal negligence, depending on what investigation revealed. Bill called me to read the relevant sections, and his voice had that tight, controlled quality he got when he was professionally furious. "Marcus," he said, "I've been doing this job for 19 years and I've seen a lot of stupid decisions made by people who should know better, but this one might actually take the prize. That HOA president authorized theft of county property without bothering to verify what she was stealing. The towing company took county property without bothering to check who owned it. And now they're demanding ransom to give it back. I'm going to make sure this gets expensive for both of them." "How expensive?" I asked. "We're estimating $8,500 in county costs so far," he said. "Staff time, legal review, vehicle recovery operation. Could go higher depending on how long this takes and how cooperative they decide to be. That's just compensatory. If we pursue punitive damages, which we might, it goes up significantly." At noon, I was standing in front of Patriot Towing with a small army. Tom Braddock in his state fire marshal uniform with his badge and credentials. 2 sheriff's deputies in full uniform because this was now officially a law enforcement matter. Bill Howell in his suit with his clipboard thick with documents. Jennifer Marks in her power suit with her leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. And me in my fire chief uniform with my badge clearly visible because I wanted everyone to understand exactly who they'd just screwed with. The tow yard looked exactly like you'd expect a place like this to look. Chain link fence topped with rusted barbed wire that had probably been up since the 80s. Rows of impounded cars baking in the May sun, paint fading, windows dusty. Oil stains on cracked concrete that told stories about decades of leaking vehicles. A small office building with bars on the windows and a faded sign that hadn't been repainted since before I was born. Weeds growing through cracks in the pavement because apparently maintaining your own property wasn't a priority when you were busy towing other people's vehicles. A dog barking somewhere in the back, probably a pit bull or a Rottweiler because every tow yard seems to have one. The smell of hot metal and old motor oil and desperation. The owner came out when he saw the official vehicles pulling up, and you could see the exact moment his brain started processing that something was very wrong. His name tag said Dale. Thick man in his 60s wearing a greasy Carhartt jacket despite the heat. Jeans that had seen better days about 10 years ago. Work boots with steel toes worn smooth from decades of use. He had the kind of face that had seen a lot of confrontations over the years and wasn't impressed by much anymore. The face of someone who'd been yelled at by angry people demanding their cars back about 1,000 times and had learned to just not care. "You can't just show up here with cops and demand property," he said, crossing his arms over his chest in that universal gesture of "I'm not moving." That's exactly what we're doing, Tom said, stepping forward with his state credentials held up so Dale couldn't miss them. I'm State Fire Marshal Thomas Braddock. This is County Fire Chief Marcus Reed, County Administrator Bill Howell, Chief County Attorney Jennifer Marks, and 2 deputies from the Sheriff's Office. You're currently holding a registered emergency vehicle that belongs to Wake County, and you're going to release it immediately. No fees, no charges, no paperwork beyond a release form acknowledging you returned county property that you should never have taken in the first place. Dale's face went through a fascinating progression in about 5 seconds. Confident to confused to pale to that particular shade of gray people get when they realize they've made a mistake that's about to cost them everything. Nobody told me it was a county vehicle, he said, and I could hear the first note of panic creeping into his voice like water through a cracked foundation. The work order said commercial vehicle blocking residential access. Did you verify the VIN before impounding? Tom asked, pulling out a small notebook and a pen like he was about to write a very expensive ticket. Silence. Dale looked at the ground. Did you check the registration? Tom continued. More silence, louder this time. Did you attempt to contact any county office to verify ownership before you hooked up a $180,000 vehicle and drove away with it? Dale's defiance was crumbling like wet cardboard. We just followed the work order from the HOA, he said, and his voice had gone from aggressive to defensive. That's what we do. We get a work order, we execute it. We don't question every single detail. That's not an answer to my question, Tom said, and his voice had gone flat and hard. North Carolina law requires verification of ownership before impounding any vehicle over 10,000 pounds. That's not a suggestion. That's state law. Emergency vehicles have additional protections under Statute 20-169 specifically because of situations like this. You violated both. Dale's face went from gray to almost green. We were just following procedures, he tried. Your procedures are inadequate and possibly criminal, Jennifer said, stepping forward and snapping open her briefcase with a sound like a gunshot. She pulled out a document and handed it to Dale. This is a preliminary assessment of the violations we've identified so far. Improper impound without verification. Unlawful detention of government property. Violation of State Statute 20-169. Possible extortion given the ransom demand. The State Licensing Board will be notified today, and you should expect an investigation into your operating procedures. How many other vehicles have you impounded without proper verification? Bill asked, and it wasn't really a question. More like an accusation wearing a question mark. Dale didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. So this is a pattern, Bill said, not an isolated incident. That makes it substantially worse from a regulatory standpoint. Show me the work order, Jennifer said, extending her hand. Dale disappeared into the office and came back with a single sheet of paper that looked like it had been printed on a home printer. Jennifer scanned it with a portable device she'd brought, made a digital copy, and handed back the original. This work order contains no VIN, she said, examining the document. No license plate number. No registered owner information. No verification of authority to request removal. Just a vague description that could apply to dozens of vehicles. You accepted this and impounded a vehicle worth over $180,000 without doing basic due diligence. That's not just negligence. That's reckless. Tom pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking quietly for a moment, then hung up and looked at Dale. I've just notified the State Licensing Board that you've impounded an emergency vehicle without authorization. They'll be opening an investigation this afternoon. Based on what we've found here, you're looking at potential license suspension at minimum, possible revocation depending on what else they discover. Dale went completely pale, and I could actually see his hands starting to shake. We didn't mean to, he started. Intent doesn't matter, Tom cut him off. Results matter. You took county property. You're holding it for ransom. Whether you meant to or not is legally irrelevant. Now here's what's going to happen, and you're going to listen very carefully. You're going to release that fire truck to Chief Reed immediately. No fees, no charges, no storage costs, no retrieval fees, no oversized vehicle surcharges, nothing. You're going to provide a written release acknowledging you're returning county property. Then you're going to sit down with the State Licensing Board investigators and explain your verification procedures, or your complete lack thereof. And you're going to hope they don't find enough violations to pull your license permanently, Because I promise you they're going to look at every single impound you've done for the past 5 years. 20 minutes later, I was walking through that tow yard with Tom beside me, past rows of sad impounded cars with expired inspection stickers and parking tickets, and all the small tragedies of people who couldn't afford to get their vehicles back, until we found Bay 7. And there it was. 32 feet of 1952 Seagrave pumper, engine red paint gleaming even in the harsh sunlight filtering through the corrugated metal roof, chrome work reflecting like mirrors despite sitting in this dump for 6 hours, gold lettering perfect and clear, brass bell polished and beautiful. I ran my hands over the hood slowly, checking for scratches or dents or any damage at all. Nothing. The tow truck operator had been careful, probably because even he could tell the Seagrave was worth more than everything else in the yard combined, including Dale's office. I climbed up into the driver's seat, felt the worn leather under my hands that my father's hands had touched 40 years ago, turned the key in the ignition. The engine caught on the first try the way it always did, that deep rumble of the flathead inline-six that resonated in your chest and your bones, the sound of American engineering from an era when they built things to last forever. I let it idle for a minute, checking gauges and instruments, making sure. Nothing had been damaged during the tow. Everything was perfect. Tom stood beside the truck with one hand on the running board. "You're not taking this home," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Not yet," I agreed. "We're driving it straight to that HOA clubhouse. I want every single board member and every resident who complained to see exactly what they stole." "That's exactly what I was thinking," Tom said with a grim smile. We created quite a scene pulling into the Riverside Meadows clubhouse parking lot at 1 in the afternoon. 5 official vehicles with lights flashing and a vintage fire truck that took up half the parking lot. Engine rumbling, chrome gleaming in the sun like a monument to their stupidity. The clubhouse was hosting what looked like a garden committee meeting. Women in sundresses and men in golf shirts with the subdivision logo embroidered on them, standing around with glasses of iced tea and talking about mulch or perennials or whatever garden committees discuss when they've got nothing better to do. They all stopped and stared when our convoy pulled up. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone dropped their tea glass. I climbed out of the Seagrave in my full dress uniform, badge visible, 3 stars on my collar, and walked toward the clubhouse entrance. Tom walked beside me in his state uniform. The deputies stayed near their cruiser, hands resting near their belts in that casual but official way that makes it very clear this is law enforcement business. Donna Kelshire came out of the clubhouse, and I watched her face go through the same progression Dale's had. Confidence to confusion to recognition to fear. She was wearing white linen pants and a blue silk blouse, hair perfect, makeup flawless, but her hands started shaking the moment she recognized me in uniform, and her brain started putting together what my presence here with all this backup meant for her. "Chief Reed," she said, trying to sound authoritative and failing completely. "I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to wake up to an empty driveway this morning," I said, and I could hear the edge in my own voice. "But here we are, Donna. Here we are indeed." Before she could respond, a man came out behind her. Mid-40s, expensive golf shirt with the subdivision logo. Designer sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. That particular kind of confidence that comes from never having been seriously challenged on anything in your entire life. "I'm Richard Vance," he said, "board treasurer. I think there's been a misunderstanding here." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, and I actually laughed. "A misunderstanding is when you accidentally get the wrong order at a restaurant. This is theft." "No misunderstanding," Tom said, stepping forward with his credentials out again. "I'm State Fire Marshal Braddock. You're the HOA board that authorized removal of a registered emergency vehicle without verifying ownership, without confirming you had legal authority, without bothering to ask what the hell you were actually looking at." Richard's confidence wavered like a candle in wind. "We acted on multiple complaints from residents about commercial equipment," he said, but his voice had lost that certainty. "That's a fire truck," Tom said flatly, gesturing at the Seagrave behind us. 1952 Seagrave pumper, clearly marked as county property, emergency lights visible on the roof, county fire department written on the doors in letters a foot tall, chrome bell mounted on the front that any person with functioning eyes could identify. "What part of that looked like commercial equipment to you?" Richard glanced at Donna, and I could see him realizing he was on his own here. "We were told it was a personal restoration project," He tried. It is a county-funded heritage restoration for our 75th anniversary celebration, I said, and I pulled out a copy of the documentation from my jacket. Every receipt filed with the county. Every dollar accounted for. The vehicle is registered to Wake County Fire Department, exempt from HOA restrictions under North Carolina General Statute 20-169. You stole government property. And that word, stole, hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Donna's face went white. Not just pale, but actually white like someone had photoshopped the color out. We didn't know it was county property, she whispered. You didn't ask, I said, and my voice came out harder than I intended, but I didn't try to soften it. That's the entire problem right there. You saw something you didn't like, you assumed you had authority over it, and you acted without verifying basic facts, without asking questions, without showing the slightest bit of curiosity about what you were actually dealing with. Jennifer stepped forward and handed Donna a folder, and I noticed Donna's hands were actually trembling as she took it. This outlines the legal exposure you've created, Jennifer said in that calm attorney voice that's somehow more terrifying than yelling. Theft of government property. Improper use of HOA authority. Violation of state statutes protecting emergency vehicles. The county is currently considering whether to press criminal charges. We're also pursuing recovery of costs, currently estimated at $8,500 for staff time, legal review, and vehicle recovery operations. That number doesn't include potential punitive damages, which could be substantial given the willful nature of the violation. Donna opened the folder with shaking hands, and I watched the color drain even further from her face as she read. $8,500, she whispered. That's preliminary, Jennifer said. If this proceeds to litigation and we add punitive damages, the exposure increases significantly. Your insurance won't cover this because it was an intentional act outside your authority, not an accident covered by general liability, which means every homeowner in this association could face special assessment to cover the costs. And that's when Richard Vance's face went pale too. Wait, this affects all of us, not just the board? When the HOA acts, it acts on behalf of all members, Bill said, speaking up for the first time. You're jointly and severally liable for the board's actions. That's how HOA law works. Every single homeowner could be on the hook. Another board member came out, an older woman in her 60s with perfectly styled gray hair, and that particular expression of someone who's just realized something terrible is happening and they're part of it. I'm Patricia Morrison, she said, board secretary. Can we please discuss this inside, away from the residents? This is becoming a spectacle. No, Tom said flatly. This is a public matter involving public property and public officials. Your residents have a right to know what their board did in their name. And honestly, I think they need to understand the consequences of electing people who don't bother to verify facts before they act. By now, more people had gathered. Neighbors coming out of the clubhouse, stopping their cars in the parking lot, getting out to see what was happening, pulling out phones to record. I recognized a few faces from around the neighborhood. People I'd seen at the gas station, the grocery store, the hardware store on Saturday mornings. People whose houses I'd probably protected during calls without them ever knowing who I was or what I did. One woman stepped forward from the crowd, maybe early 40s, wearing running gear like she'd been out for her daily jog. I'm Lisa Chun, she said. I live on Maple Court. That's Chief Reed from the county fire department. He came to my daughter's elementary school last year and taught them about fire safety and stop, drop, and roll, and let them try on his helmet. Donna, what the hell did you do? Donna looked like she wanted the earth to open up and swallow her whole. Another voice from the crowd, this one male. That's a fire truck? I thought the letters said it was some kind of commercial vehicle or delivery truck. That's exactly the problem, I said, turning to address the growing crowd because they deserved to hear this. Directly. Your board saw something they didn't understand, something that didn't fit their vision of what the neighborhood should look like, and instead of asking questions, instead of doing basic research, instead of picking up the phone and calling me, they acted. They authorized the theft of that truck. And I gestured behind me at the Seagrave, sitting there gleaming in the sun like evidence at a trial. That truck is Engine 7. It served this community for 31 years. It responded to the textile mill fire in 1967 that killed 4 people. It pulled children out of Roosevelt Elementary when the roof collapsed in 73. My father served on that truck. We've spent 3 years and $118,000 restoring it for the fire department's anniversary celebration. And your board had it stolen at 5 this morning because they thought it was an eyesore that was hurting your property values. The crowd's mood shifted, and I could feel it like a weather change. Murmurs of disbelief, anger starting to rise, directed at the board, not at me. Donna, Patricia, and Richard huddled together, whispering urgently, and I could see Patricia's face getting red and Richard shaking his head. After a moment, Donna stepped forward and she looked 10 years older than she had 5 minutes ago. "Chief Reed," she said, and her voice was shaking. "Can we please speak privately? I really think we can work this out without all this public attention." "This doesn't need to be private," I said. "But I'll tell you what needs to happen, and you're going to listen very carefully. You're calling an emergency board meeting tonight. Full attendance, all residents invited. You're explaining to every homeowner exactly what you did and exactly what the liability exposure is. You're resigning as president effective immediately. You're issuing a written apology to me and to Wake County. And you're revising your HOA bylaws to explicitly acknowledge that emergency vehicles, active or historic, are permanently exempt from all restrictions. If you do all of that, and I mean all of it, the county might consider not pressing criminal charges." "Might. Criminal charges," Richard repeated, and his voice cracked like a teenage boy's. "Theft of government property is a felony when the value exceeds $1,000, Jennifer said calmly. "We're looking at $180,000 in vehicle value, plus $118,000 in restoration work. The value threshold isn't even close." There was a long silence, and I could hear someone in the crowd crying softly. Then Donna said, barely audible, "I'll do it. All of it. I'll resign tonight." "But there's one more thing," I said, and Donna looked at me with red-rimmed eyes like she couldn't imagine what else I could possibly want. 3 years ago, there was a soccer game at the community park over on Willow Street. It was a Saturday afternoon in April, temperature in the 70s, perfect spring day. A 10-year-old boy had a severe asthma attack during the game. His airways closed up, oxygen saturation dropped into the 70s. He was turning blue. "Do you remember that, Donna?" Donna's face crumpled like paper in a fire, and she put one hand over her mouth. "That was my son," she whispered. "That was Daniel. I was the first medic on scene," I said, and I could hear my voice starting to crack despite trying to keep it steady. "I was off duty, watching my nephew play in the same game, but I responded anyway because that's what you do." I kept Daniel breathing for 8 minutes until the ambulance arrived. Bag valve mask, oxygen, positioning, the whole protocol. I rode with him to the hospital. I stayed with him in the emergency room until the doctors got him stabilized and said he was going to be okay. I stayed until you got there from wherever you were, and I waited until you stopped crying long enough to ask me who I was, and I told you I was just a firefighter who happened to be there. Do you remember what you said to me?" She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, mascara running. "I said you saved his life," she whispered, "and I said thank you seemed inadequate, but it was all I had. And I told you thank you was enough," I said, "because we don't do this job for thanks. We do it because it's the right thing to do. Because someone has to. Because down here in North Carolina, we take care of each other. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. I've spent 25 years protecting this community, Donna. 25 years pulling people out of burning houses. Holding scared kids' hands while waiting for ambulances. Teaching fire safety at schools so maybe fewer kids have to go through what Daniel went through. Responding to accidents and medical emergencies and hazmat incidents and every other crisis you can imagine. And when you saw a fire truck in my driveway, that truck that saved lives, including your son's life indirectly by being the truck that trained the medics who trained me, you didn't think to ask why. You didn't think to verify. You didn't think at all. You just decided it didn't fit your aesthetic vision and you had it taken." The word taken echoed across the parking lot. The crowd was completely silent now. You could have heard a pin drop on that asphalt. Donna had sunk down onto a bench beside the clubhouse entrance, her perfect composure completely shattered, crying openly. Several people in the crowd looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight, not sure where to look. One older man stepped forward from the crowd, probably mid-70s, wearing a veteran's cap with VFW pins. "I'm Robert Hutchins," he said, and his voice carried across the parking lot. "I sold the land that became this subdivision back in 2004, and I rode Engine 7 from 1964 to 1971. Chief Reed's father and I served together. Tom Reed was one of the finest firefighters I ever knew, and his son here has carried on that legacy with honor. If I'd known what this board was planning to do, I'd have stopped it myself. That truck saved my life in the warehouse fire of '79 when the roof started coming down. Engine 7 was there. That truck pumped water for 16 hours straight while we fought that fire, and 3 of us made it out alive because that truck and its crew didn't quit. Robert turned to face Donna directly, and his voice got harder. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should be absolutely ashamed. And every resident in this subdivision should be asking themselves how they elected a board that would do something this stupid, this disrespectful, and this illegal without even the most basic verification. There was scattered applause from the crowd, and I saw several people nodding in agreement. Richard tried one more time. We were trying to protect property values, he said weakly. You want to know what protects property values? I asked, and I wasn't even trying to hide the anger in my voice anymore. Having a fire department that responds in under 6 minutes when your house is on fire. Having paramedics who keep your kid breathing when they can't breathe on their own. Having trained professionals who risk their lives to protect yours. That's what protects property values. Not matching mailboxes and perfect lawns and getting rid of anything that doesn't fit your boring suburban fantasy. The emergency board meeting happened that night at 7 in the clubhouse community room, and Sarah and I sat in the back row watching the whole thing unfold. Every seat was filled, people standing along the walls. More people outside looking through the windows because there wasn't room inside. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Donna stood at the front with Tom and Bill and Jennifer, and her voice shook as she explained everything. The 3 letters I'd received and ignored because I was busy doing my actual job. The authorization to tow without verification. Finding out after the fact that it was county property. The $8,500 liability that was now hanging over every homeowner. When she got to that number, the room erupted. People shouting. How did you not verify ownership first? Why didn't you just call him and ask what it was? That's the fire chief, for Christ's sake. He saved lives in this neighborhood. One man stood up, red-faced and angry. I'm Kevin Patterson, he said. Chief Reed and his crew saved my house 2 years ago when my dryer caught fire in the middle of the night. They were professional, they were kind, they stayed until they were absolutely certain we were safe and the fire was completely out. My wife and I tried to thank them, and Chief Reed said they were just doing their job. And this is how you repaid that? By stealing his truck at 5 in the morning? Another woman stood. I'm Sandra Gomez. I'm a paralegal, and I've looked at the documents the county provided. The HOA acted outside its legal authority. We authorized a felony. A felony? Do you understand what that means? Our insurance won't cover this. We're all going to be assessed to pay for this mistake. My kid's college fund might have to pay for this board's incompetence. Donna tried to maintain composure, but her voice kept breaking. I made assumptions, she said. I thought I had authority I didn't actually have. I didn't verify basic facts. I didn't ask the right questions. I was wrong. I was completely wrong, and I take full responsibility. The meeting lasted 2 hours and got heated more than once. By the end, Donna had resigned effective immediately. Richard resigned. Patricia resigned. The entire board essentially collapsed like a house of cards. The remaining board members, who apparently hadn't been involved in the decision, voted unanimously to revise the bylaws, issue formal apologies, and establish comprehensive verification procedures for any future actions. They voted to pay the county's costs from the reserve fund, which meant there would be no money for the playground equipment they'd been planning or the new landscaping at the entrance or any of the other improvements they'd been discussing. Every bit of reserve funds would go to paying for this mistake. As Sarah and I walked out, several neighbors stopped me. Chief, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. Thank you for everything you do for this community. Please know most of us had nothing to do with this. One man shook my hand firmly. I'm James Wilson. I'm nominating myself for the board. First thing I'm doing if I get elected is making sure we have actual oversight and verification before any action like this happens again. This was embarrassing. Good, I said, because that's exactly what leadership looks like. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived at my house. Cream-colored cardstock, same as always, but this time the message was different. Chief Reed, it read in shaky handwriting instead of that confident blue ink. I acted without full information and caused harm to you and to the community you've served with honor for 25 years. I take full responsibility for my actions and the consequences they've caused. The enclosed check represents payment of all county costs as agreed. I have resigned my position and I'm moving out of the subdivision because I cannot face the daily reminder of what I did. I hope someday you can forgive me, though I don't expect it and don't deserve it." The signature was barely legible, just a scrawl in black ballpoint. The check was for $8,500, made out to Wake County, certified funds. I stood in my kitchen holding it, and I didn't feel triumphant or satisfied or vindicated. I just felt tired. Sarah came up beside me and took the letter, read it, set it down. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "Did I?" I asked, and I realized I genuinely wasn't sure. I could have handled it differently. "You gave them chances," Sarah said. 3 letters worth of chances. They chose not to listen, not to ask, not to verify. That's on them, not on you. You protected county property, and you taught a lesson that needed teaching. But I still felt heavy about it, like winning had cost something I couldn't quite name. The 75th anniversary celebration happened. On a perfect Saturday in June, and it was everything we'd hoped for. Clear blue sky, temperature in the mid-70s, just enough breeze to keep things comfortable. We closed down 2 blocks of Main Street in downtown Raleigh for the parade, which required about 6 months of permits and planning, but was worth every bureaucratic hurdle. The high school marching band led off, playing Sousa marches that echoed off the old brick buildings. Then came our current fleet of fire trucks, engines and ladders and rescues, and the new hazmat unit we'd just taken delivery on, all with lights flashing and sirens chirping and kids on the sidewalk covering their ears and grinning. And then came Engine 7. I was driving, but I'd invited others to ride with me because this wasn't just my moment. Robert Hutchins rode in the officer's seat, tears streaming down his weathered face, one hand resting on the dashboard like he was touching history. Tom Morrison, my deputy chief, stood on the running board waving at the crowd. 2 other retired firefighters who'd served on Engine 7 in the 70s rode in the back, pointing out buildings they remembered saving. Sarah sat beside me in the cab, holding my hand when she thought no one was looking. And in the jump seat behind us, wearing a junior firefighter helmet we'd given him that morning, was Daniel Kelshire, Donna's son. The 10-year-old I'd saved 3 years ago, now 13 and grinning from ear to ear, waving at the crowd like he'd won the lottery. I'd invited him personally, driven over to Donna's house 2 weeks before, and asked if Daniel would like to ride in the truck during the parade. Donna had opened the door, and when she saw me standing there, she'd started crying before I even said anything. When I explained what I was offering, she broke down completely. "You do that?" she asked through tears. "After everything I did?" "He's a good kid," I said, "and he should get to experience this. This isn't about you and me, Donna. This is about showing a kid that being a firefighter is about service, not revenge." She nodded and called Daniel to the door, and when I asked him if he wanted to ride in a real vintage fire truck in a real parade, his face lit up like Christmas morning. Donna stood on the sidewalk as we rolled past in the parade, and when our eyes met through the crowd, I nodded slightly. She nodded back, tears streaming down her face, and mouthed the words "thank you." I nodded again. Not quite forgiveness. Not quite reconciliation. Just acknowledgement that people make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes cost more than money, but also that grudges don't build anything useful. After the parade, we parked Engine 7 in front of the fire station and opened it to the public, and for 3 hours it was beautiful chaos. Kids climbing on it, sitting in the driver's seat, ringing that brass bell over and over until their parents made them stop. Parents taking photos for Facebook and Instagram. Old-timers gathering around sharing stories, and I stepped back and let them tell it because their stories were just as important as mine. Robert Hutchins sat behind the wheel for 20 minutes, hands gripping the polished wood, eyes distant with memory, and a crowd gathered to listen to him talk about calls he'd run and fires he'd fought, and people he'd saved and people he hadn't been able to save. "That truck isn't just metal and paint and chrome," he said, and his voice carried across the parking lot. "It's memory. It's proof that we showed up when people needed us. It's the reason some of us are still here and some of our neighbors are still here and this community is still here. It's history that matters." One young boy, maybe 8 years old, stood staring up at the truck like it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Do you still use this truck for fires?" he asked me. "No," I said, kneeling down to his level so we were eye to eye. "This truck is retired. It served for 31 years, longer than a lot of firefighters serve in their entire careers, and now it teaches. It reminds us that being a firefighter isn't about the equipment or the uniform, or even the fire. It's about the people who answer the call when someone needs help. The boy thought about that seriously. When I grow up, he said, I want to drive a fire truck just like this one. Then you work hard in school, I told him. You stay out of trouble. You learn to help people and put others before yourself. You take care of your body so you're strong enough to do the job. And when you're old enough, you apply to the academy and you give it everything you've got. Deal? Deal, he said very seriously, and we shook hands like we'd just signed a contract. As the sun started to set and the crowd thinned out, we fired up Engine 7's motor one more time, let it rumble for a minute so everyone could hear that beautiful sound, then shut it down with a sense of ceremony. Sarah squeezed my hand. You did it, she said. We did it, I corrected, because she'd been part of every step of this. But I was thinking about how close we'd come to losing this moment, about how Donna's assumption and impatience and unwillingness to ask one simple question had almost cost us this celebration, about how authority without knowledge is just power waiting to be misused. The next week, I ran into Donna at the Harris Teeter grocery store. We were both in the produce section, and when she saw me, she froze for a second like a deer in headlights. Then she took a breath and walked over slowly, like she was approaching something that might bite. Chief Reed, she said quietly, and I could hear how much effort it took. I wanted to thank you for inviting Daniel to the parade. He hasn't stopped talking about it. He's decided he wants to be a firefighter now. He asks me questions I can't answer about fire science and rescue techniques, and I have to Google everything. He's a good kid, I said, and I meant it. You did well with him. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes again. I'm so sorry for what I did, she said. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know I mean it. I was wrong about everything. I know, I said, and I believe you've learned from it. She looked surprised. You're not still angry? I was angry, I said honestly. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. But anger doesn't fix anything. It doesn't restore trust or build community or teach lessons that actually stick. You made a mistake. A big one. You owned it. You're paying for it. That's more than most people do. You're also moving, she said. I'm leaving Durham next month. Moving to a condo in Charlotte. Somewhere with no HOA, no responsibilities, no authority to misuse. I nodded. Sometimes that's what it takes. A fresh start. I hope it goes well for you. I hope you know that what you do matters, she said. More than property values or perfect lawns or any of the things I thought were important. I understand that now. I should have understood it 3 years ago when you saved Daniel, but I didn't. I do now. That's all any of us can do, I said. Learn and do better next time. The Seagrave sits in my garage now, restoration complete, gleaming under the LED lights I installed. Kids from local elementary schools come by sometimes for tours, usually organized through their teachers as part of community helper units or local history projects. I let them climb in the driver's seat carefully, ring the bell gently, imagine themselves as firefighters saving the day. I tell them about the textile mill fire and the school collapse and the warehouse fire that went for 16 hours. I tell them about the men and women who served on Engine 7, about my father pulling hose through smoke thick as wool, about Robert Hutchins and the crews who came before and after, about the lives saved and the sacrifices made and the community protected. And sometimes, when the kids are old enough and I think they can handle it, I tell them about the morning I woke up and it was gone. About the HOA president who made assumptions instead of asking questions. About the expensive lesson everyone learned about verification and authority and the limits of power. I tell them that story because it matters. Because someday some of them will have authority of their own, whether it's an HOA board or a management position or a political office or just being a parent making decisions that affect their family. And I want them to remember that power without wisdom is dangerous. That authority without verification is reckless. That you can't just act because you have the legal right to act. You have to ask questions. You have to verify. You have to understand what you're actually dealing with before you make decisions that can't be unmade. You have to respect what you don't immediately recognize, because it might be worth more than you think. Donna sent me a card last Christmas, just a simple card with a winter scene on the front. Inside it said, "Thank you for reminding me what really matters." Daniel wants to be a firefighter now. He volunteers at the station on weekends, and he's already talking about the academy, even though he's only 13. I think you changed his life. Inside the card was a photo of Daniel in a Wake County Fire Department junior firefighter shirt, standing in front of Engine 7 from the parade, grinning like he'd found his purpose. I put that photo on my desk at the station where I see it every day when I'm doing paperwork or answering emails or dealing with all the administrative tasks that come with being chief. Not as a trophy, not as proof that I won some kind of battle. As a reminder that the best victories aren't about crushing people or proving you're right or extracting maximum revenge. They're about teaching lessons that actually stick and change behavior and maybe, if you're lucky, inspire the next generation to do better than we did. The new HOA president is a retired engineer named Michael Torres, and he's everything Donna wasn't. Careful, methodical, asks questions before acting, actually reads the bylaws and state statutes instead of just assuming he knows what they say. He invited me to speak at a board meeting about emergency vehicle exemptions and proper verification procedures, and I went because that's how you prevent the next incident. He asked good questions, took detailed notes, actually looked up the statutes himself afterward to verify what I'd said. That's what leadership looks like, I told him. Not confidence without basis. Not authority without understanding. Just competence and the willingness to learn and the humility to admit when you don't know something. After the meeting, Michael walked me out to my truck. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "If Donna had called you after that first letter and just asked about the truck, what would you have done?" "I would have invited her over," I said. "Would have shown her the whole restoration. Explained the history. Introduced her to Robert and some of the other veterans who served on it. She probably would have been proud to have Engine 7 in the neighborhood. She might have even helped organize the anniversary event or promoted it in one of her newsletters. The whole thing could have been a positive story instead of what it became." Michael nodded slowly. "So this all could have been avoided with one phone call. One conversation," I said. "One question. That's all it would have taken. Just, 'Hey, I noticed this red truck in your driveway. What's the story there?' And I would have told her, and she would have understood, and none of the rest of it would have happened. That's what makes it so frustrating. It was so completely unnecessary. So here's my question for you, and I'm genuinely asking because I think about this a lot. If you were on that HOA board and you saw something you didn't recognize, something that didn't fit your vision of what the neighborhood should look like, what would you do? Would you assume you had the authority to make it go away? Would you verify first? Would you ask questions and try to understand before you acted? Would you consider that maybe, just maybe, there's a reason for it that you don't know yet? Because the difference between those approaches is the difference between building community and destroying it. The difference between respecting your neighbors as human beings with their own stories and treating them as obstacles to your perfect vision. The difference between actual leadership and just holding a title with power attached. Think about that next time you see something that doesn't match your expectations or fit your idea of normal. It might be worth more than you think. It might have a history you don't know. It might belong to someone who's spent decades protecting the very community you think you're improving. It might be connected to sacrifices you can't see and service you've never had to provide and losses you've never had to bear. And if you act without asking, without verifying, without trying to understand first, you might learn a very expensive lesson about what happens when assumed authority meets documented law and protective service. I'm Marcus Reed. I'm the fire chief for Wake County, North Carolina. I'm 48 years old, and I've spent 25 years answering calls and protecting people and teaching kids and serving this community the best way I know how. And I'll never forget the morning my fire truck disappeared, or the lesson that followed about the price of assumptions, the value of verification, and the critical importance of asking one simple question before you pick up the phone and change someone's life forever. That Seagrave pumper sitting in my garage is more than a truck. It's more than metal and chrome and paint and history. It's a reminder that some things are bigger than aesthetics, more important than property values, worth protecting even when it costs you something. And sometimes the best way to protect those things is to make damn sure everyone understands why they matter in the first place. So ask questions. Verify facts. Show respect. And remember that the person you're dismissing might just be the one who shows up when your house is on fire, or your kid can't breathe, or your world is falling apart, and you need someone who actually knows what they're doing. We'll be there. We always are. That's the job. That's the calling. And that 1952 Seagrave pumper is proof that we've been showing up for 75 years, and we're not stopping now.